Hey, Big Bulls, we are back with yet another episode with three key and most interesting stories that happened in the stock markets this week. And just to remind you, none of what we discuss here is investment advice.
Right. So this time we are covering Asian Paints stock slide, which is more than just an earnings blip. Second, we are going to talk about Anil Ambani is in the news again because Reliance Power is in hot waters again. And the third part is NTPC Green Energy's IPO that's hitting the stock markets next week. So Nitin, Asian Paints shares have dropped over 15% in just last 5 trading sessions, right? That's a big fall for a large cap stock. What's the scoop there?
So it's something to do with the Q2 earnings, right? Q2 earnings is your September, August, and July, right? So it's a July to September quarter. And for a paint company like Asian Paints, there's one thing that you must remember, that Q2 is typically a weak quarter. And the reason for that is fairly simple. It's to do with the monsoons. When it's raining outside, people are not rushing to go and paint their houses, right? So that's something to keep in mind. But let me actually compare Q2 of this year for Asian Paints with the Q2 of last year. And there is where we see a problem shaping up. So Asian Paints' consolidated net sales, the revenues, have fallen by 5% in this Q2 compared to last Q2. And its profits, that has dropped like a rock. It has fallen by 42%.
So is this universal subdued demand that everyone's been talking about?
Well, sort of, right? Because all of us know that there is definitely a slowdown in the urban areas. There's high inflation. The prices of all the commodities are actually rising. So there's definitely a slowdown happening there. And even from if you look at FMCG companies such as Britannia, their MD, Varun Berry, has also stated that, there's a problem happening on the urban consumption front, which is affecting them as well. But what is interesting is in the rural areas, a report by Nielsen IQ actually shows that rural demand is actually rising. It has grown by 6% compared to 2.8% in urban areas. But the problem with this is also that research says that urban India is actually the segment that drives consumption in India. In fact, 2/3 of consumption in India comes from the urban areas, right? So that is a problem because when urban consumption is hit, the companies are also hit much harder, right? And at the end of the day, you have to remember that the stock market and the economy, they are a function of how the home companies also perform, right? So that reflects what is happening with Asian Paints, reflects the change that is taking place in household spending and consumption patterns.
You did mention Asian Paints net profit has fallen 42%, right? So what are the key reasons for this fall?
Right. So number one is actually the raw material cost. Asian Paints' raw material cost has jumped by 1.5% in this quarter.
So what raw material?
So Asian Paints as a paint company, they have two primary ingredients. One is crude oil, the oil that you see every day.
Right.
And the second aspect of it is the titanium dioxide. Titanium dioxide is a pigment that's used to give more sheen and durability to paint. So these are the two key ingredients that go into a lot of paints. Sure, Asian Paints does have water-based paints as well, but crude is still in the mix. Mm-hmm. But over here, what you also have to remember is Asian Paints has to import a lot of its raw material. So if there is a fall in the rupee's value, there is rupee depreciation. That affects the, end profits and margins for Asian Paints as well. Secondly, a thing to note is that Asian Paints is expanding their direct-to-retail model. So they're also hiring and expanding their workforce for this. So the employee costs also have gone up for Asian Paints. But let me also tell you that it's just not the economy. We already said there are some business, margins that have been affected for Asian Paints. But the bigger problem, I think, that's hitting Asian Paints right now is their competition. And the reason why I'm saying is because if you look at Asian Paints' share price in the last 3 years, it has fallen by nearly 20%. And the competition that I'm talking about are these big-pocketed players like Birla's Opus, which has really made a big bang in the industry. And some brokerage reports actually suggest that they're offering very steep discounts to counter Asian Paints' dominance in the market.
Mm-hmm. So that's going to be an interesting time for Asian Paints for sure, I guess.
For sure. So now, Saloni, now that we're done with Asian Paints, let's talk about Anil Ambani because he's in the news again.
Again, yeah.
Yeah.
So for that, let me tell you a quick story. Once upon a time, there were two brothers, both obviously in the line for their father's throne. And they both worked together until they couldn't, right? So one flourished to become, India's richest man, whereas another one struggled and actually suffered from insolvency and bad debts as well. That's the story of Anil Ambani and his business journey. And that's been filled with highs and lows, right? So after their father, Dhirubhai Ambani, who built the empire, had a stroke in 2002, Mukesh took over the oil and petroleum businesses, and Anil focused on finance and telecom business. Now, Reliance, the oil and petroleum business that we've seen, obviously has flourished. But on the other hand, Anil's ventures actually hit a rough patch. Talking about Reliance Communications, Reliance Capital, and Reliance Infrastructure, all of them went bankrupt one after one. And once valued at around $42 billion, and he was actually known as the sixth richest person in 2008, Anil Ambani declared bankruptcy in the UK court in 2020, of course, after facing all these legal and financial troubles, right?
So I wonder if someone asked him if you could go back in time and change anything, what would he answer?
Maybe everything.
Could be, right?
Could be, yeah. But again, fast forward to September this year. His group company started making this noise, and they made certain announcements that actually led to investors talking, could this be the start of the turnaround that everybody was expecting? So he actually introduced this fund infusion plans, and he said that the companies will become nearly debt-free. That sent shares of Reliance Infrastructure and Reliance Power to, new highs. But again, we're talking about Anil Ambani, and apparently struggles seem to follow him everywhere. Now, Solar Energy Corp has banned the company for 3 years to take on any new tenders. This is on some fake legal documents that they have been fighting on.
Wow.
Right. And the decision of this is something that obviously Reliance Power plans to challenge.
Yeah.
But because of this negative sentiment, we've seen the stocks of Reliance Power actually hitting lower circuits back to back in the last 5 days and actually fallen like 10% during the time.
And so when you say lower circuit, it means that there's a maximum limit allowed.
Yeah.
If that wasn't there, probably it would have fallen even far greater than what it did, right? All right, so that's interesting. Anil Ambani is back in the news, but again, it's not for good reasons, it seems. But finally, Saloni, to tell me a little bit more about NTPC Green that's coming out. Their IPO is scheduled for the 19th of November. So let's talk about NTPC a little bit.
So before NTPC Green, let me talk about NTPC, which is a parent firm, right?
Sure.
And this is how they define themselves. India's top power generator, lighting up the nation and meeting its energy needs. Now, there's a story to that. Okay, back in the 70s, when India was going through the industrialization, NTPC actually set up these coal-fired plants and ran these plants to meet the country's huge power demands, right? And they worked from generating this electricity to even delivering it. So that's how NTPC became this largest player. But again, the world evolved and everyone started talking about the move towards clean energy. And India also pledged to move away from coal and actually focus on the sustainable future. That's when NTPC shifted gears, and they have set a goal to hit 60 gigawatt of renewable energy by FY32.
Okay, so 60 gigawatts, I can't quite picture it. So what does 60 gigawatts actually mean, Saloni?
Technically, 60 gigawatts is something that can power 4.5 crore homes, right? And as non-fossil fuel power cannot be run 24/7 because obviously there are storage limits to that, NTPC plans to get 45% of its energy from renewables by 2032. And for this, they set up NTPC Green Energy in 2022.
Okay, so Saloni, tell me one thing. How does NTPC Green actually even make money?
They work with the governments and power utilities, and they form these agreements where they work on these projects that are related to solar and wind, and that's how they generate revenue from these projects that they work on. And as of September 30, 2024, they have around 3,222 megawatts of solar and 100 megawatts of wind capacity across 6 states in India.
Okay, that's interesting. But I'm assuming there are other listed peers as well, right? I was just looking at some of the names, and there's Wari Energies, there's Premier Energies, and Acme Solar as well, which has gone public this year.
Yeah, obviously they are the competitors, but its main competitor is this private player, Adani Green. Obviously, we've been reading about what Adani Green has been doing, and we've seen the share price also skyrocketing, right? So Adani Green is also behind this Khavra renewable project, and it claims it to be the world's largest upon completion, right? So that's something that NTPC Green will have to compete with. Adani Green also made headlines in April when it actually became the first company in India to surpass 10,000 megawatt of renewable energy capacity.
There's one thing here, right, Saloni? Analysts are actually worried about NTPC Green's high valuation. One of the analysts told Reuters that, quote unquote, it seems overpriced for a company that's behind its peers on key metrics.
I think they mean Adani Green here.
Could be, right?
Yeah. So NTPC Green, because it's a PSU, right? They definitely get this boost from government support and the financing. But they need to keep an eye on how private players who move faster, obviously based on the deliveries and based on the ways that they make money, that's something I think NTPC Green will also have to catch up on. And also, for now at least, the PSU is expanding on wind, solar, nuclear, and also bigger focus on renewables and energy storage, right?
So it's going to grow bigger than its parent if it goes at this rate.
That's what they aim to be.
All right, Saloni, I think that's it for today with Bullseye. I think we have spoken about 3 very interesting stories. There's Asian Paints. We spoke about Anil Ambani's possible comeback. And we also spoke about the new IPO that's NTPC Green that's coming out. And with that, that's a wrap on this episode of Bullseye. Stay tuned for next week where we'll be back with 3 more very interesting stories.